Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So, wanted to talk today about how liberals like Kyle Kulinski, TJ, Timothy Kirk, the amazing atheist, I've watched them for many years, right? Over 10 years. And and also Dave Smith, the Jewish guy who's a libertarian on Part of the Problem podcast. He and others like him often say legalizing, taxing, and regulating all drugs will make the cartels of Mexico lose their financing, that they'll become poor and destitute because they won't be able to make as much money on drugs. Meanwhile, if you look at the alcohol companies, during Prohibition, yes, there was the mafia, but today you literally have those mega beer corporations in Mexico like Modelo and Tecate fighting over water rights. So water is being taken from communities and turned into beer instead of giving it to the needy, and the water is getting purified to make beer but isn't getting purified in the rural communities. And so we see that the corporations that rose up did not become more moral, and the amount of people now who die from alcohol-related car accidents, diseases, women drinking while pregnant, even the unborn can't be spared from the effects of alcohol, fetal alcohol syndrome, stuff like that. You can't escape it, the nightmare that alcohol has created, and how alcohol is promoted everywhere. If you recall, I posted a truck that just had a giant Modelo advertisement, and it was parked in front of a school because there was a market there. And kids, coming out of school seeing a giant advertisement for alcohol. You go on Pinterest, for example, and constantly I'll get ads for alcohol. And due to this, it just makes me think, how am I getting ads for alcohol when I don't look up anything related to alcohol at all? Okay? So we know that they're pushing alcohol on people, and it's not just about your search history, right? And targeted ads. And time again, we'll see alcohol advertisements in the sports industry. Okay, so kids are being bombarded at a higher level now with alcohol, like with alcohol-related advertisements. And so society has not let go of the consumption of alcohol just because it became legal. And every supermarket you go into, there's all sorts of varieties. So the alcohol companies actually just became richer. Okay, vast amounts of different wines, vodkas, gins, whiskeys, rums, grappas, it's everywhere. So that argument doesn't really work. Nobody became poorer and went out of business because alcohol became legal. It actually opened up to expand the accessibility of alcohol. And others have pointed out, in poor communities, the liquor stores are really quite everywhere. And people get bored, and then they just drink and drink and drink. Okay? It's even a meme in some communities, like, oh, just give them a 6-pack of beer and, some chips and stuff, and they'll work really hard to build whatever you need them to build. So, alcohol didn't really become less consumed just because it was legal, right? And so, my point is, with that whole example, is that when someone says to legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs, to decriminalize it, the cartels will just open legitimate businesses. So cocaine, meth, heroin, fentanyl, different kinds of drugs that literally destroy your body and your mind, they shouldn't be sold at all. They shouldn't be sold at all. And so, if these liberals continue to promote drugs, and libertarians as well, They always have this air of, well, it's, you know, why should I care about what you put in your body? If you're not hurting anybody, it's totally fine. Ignoring the fact that a lot of the drugs are going to cause mental illness. Those women are going to end up, some of them not having kids because they're going to be destitute, or having a drug-induced abortion, or having to give their child up because they're such pathetic drug addicts. And they're going to be in an old folks' home with their drug-induced mental illness, with their teeth rotting out, and hallucinating in the corner as someone in a, you know, nurse outfit feeds them Jello. And they're going to rot away in an asylum or in a prison because they've rotted their brain with drugs. So it's not a glorious end. It's quite alarming how many people, especially like Joe Rogan, he pushes drugs and alcohol constantly. And one of his dearest friends, Joey Diaz, was a guy who used to slang drugs. And so if you look at how when you're young and you're beautiful as a woman, you're like party, drink, drugs, but they don't ever help these young ones realize drugs will take your beauty. Like, it literally only takes away from your beauty. If you just look at the trajectory of meth, like girls will be at a party, a guy or another chick will introduce some drugs, they smoke meth, and then they like, oh, I want to get that high again, and it becomes worse and worse and worse. You'll see some of the most beautiful women go nuts, okay? And they'll sell their bodies to get money for the drugs, and it's all downhill, worse and worse. The more trauma they get, the more drugs they use, the more they hallucinate, the more they want to stay in that imaginary world. And they love the drug more than themselves, more than their family, and then they use so many drugs, and the drugs have such a negative consequence on their body. It makes them more depressed, crazy. They have random schizophrenic episodes. They harm themselves, they harm others, and they go berserk. And many of them overdose as well, or they jump off something and hurt themselves. They get some sick, nasty infection because they're out there getting cut on stuff, and a lot of meth heads will pick at their skin, you know, and just go completely nuts, and it gets all infected. Their face becomes deformed. And so a liberal who's like, yeah, it's, you know, it's totally fine, you know, why should you care? It doesn't hurt society. You know, they shouldn't be in jail for that. Drug dealers should just open a legal business and it'll be totally fine and the market will solve its problem. No. No. There's no benefit to society by allowing the distribution of drugs. Big Pharma is already a problem. Okay? Or they're just giving pills after pills and mind-numbing cocktails up to children, to people who have mental problems. It's always a pill. Okay? And a lot of corrupt scientists and corrupt doctors, they want to get that payday, they want to go on that vacation. Their wifey, you know, needs some new purses, so they want to get that money. It's not about saving humanity, but adding to their bank account to pay off that debt they took in medical school. And so not every doctor is moral and speaks out against the drug companies, but Big Pharma is the biggest drug dealer. So I don't see why libertarians and liberals, especially atheists, think it's wise to make it easier for the distribution and accessibility of drugs in communities. It really does go to show that they don't view life as worth living sober. They think they have to be high. They have to escape from their own mind. They deny spirituality, but then they cling to their intoxicants in order to feel something in their void and to feel like they can access wisdom. They don't think they can access wisdom without drugs, without intoxicants. And Islam calls us to be stronger than that. But it should be reminded to many of these young feminist women who will supplicate the void of sadness within them with drugs, that if you keep consuming drugs and alcohol, you keep popping pills and drinking red wine doing all that and whoring around, calling yourself an empowered woman, that sadness of rotating men, of lowering your health because of alcohol and pills, you might just put yourself into like an early dementia mindset. Like, you can get some debilitating liver problems, lose your beauty really fast and your ability to work beyond disability, and then be pushed into an old folks facility. And if you don't have someone to visit you who actually cares about you, you'll rot in loneliness. And so you don't want to be a disgruntled, mentally deranged, addicted person isolated in a facility. That's not a triumphant end. A healthy, sober family is the goal, not isolation and drug addiction mixed with depression. It's a very lonely fate for drug addicts in general who won't quit and get sober, and for the childless who then also cling to drugs for love. The drug becomes their owner. The drug becomes their master. So anyone who promotes drugs is promoting the enslavement of a human being. And a lot of liberals, I've had a professor, I've told this story many times. Sometimes I want to dox her and say her name, but I won't. But she's a Nancy Pelosi type of Democrat, and in her class, which I was taking, we were studying the Constitution, and the issue of legalizing drugs came up, and I said I'd rather my mom be in jail or dead than back to using drugs again because of the harm it would cause my family. And she was like, no, that's not good, Because they were talking about safe injection sites, how San Francisco has places where people can go and get high safely, which is mind-numbing, because drugs are not safe. And yes, they may have an episode where they hallucinate and see, strange entities, and they can't go jump off a building, but their body is being poisoned. And people creating a building and a safe place for people to poison themselves is already wrong. And kids walking past a building, and they're like, what's that place, Mom? Oh, that's a place where people go get high and poison themselves and become more mentally ill. Smoking crack and meth and shooting up heroin. And then the liberals will say it's successful because not too many people are overdosing, ignoring the fact that few are getting sober. And they're like, oh, well, they'll live to see another day. Yeah, live another day to get high. So you're just postponing their death by a few days or weeks, but you're still enabling self-harm. Drugs are only self-harm. And in a proper society, we would have the death penalty for drug addicts who won't get sober. If they're like, no, I'm gonna just be mentally ill and I'm gonna just go around shanking people, you're like, no, okay, you gotta do something. And drug dealers should get the death penalty because they're pushing drugs out there and suffering no consequences. Now, there are addicts who they want to get sober. You give them the help they need. But there are some people who are like, no, I'm staying locked in this imaginary world, and they'll hurt anyone and do anything for the drug. Even if you put them in a cage, a prison cell, they're gonna find a way in prison to get their drugs. So it's like, okay, you're just broken, and you don't want to repair yourself. You need to fix it, but some people don't want to. Some people, as soon as they get out, they go right back to it. And then they hurt more and more people and facilitate the consumption of drugs through their purchasing power, and that goes and harms society. Duterte of the Philippines, I think, had a good idea. When he allowed people to do public executions, vigilante style, I believe. on drug dealers. And I think that that's smart, because he pointed out, drugs destroy countries. Drugs can only harm. And atheists, they pretend to be better than thou. But in reality, they're all really hedonistic drug addicts who love to play like rhetorical word games and like syllogistic fallacy competitions, but they don't really have that many solutions. They permit almost everything except the restriction of drugs and the restrictions of pornography and the restrictions of prostitution. You'll see them enable sin, and they mask it as a progressive ideal, ignoring the actual rot that behavior allows. Okay? So they'll point out how mean it is to stone an adulterer, but if you have a facility where people can go use meth, and someone is literally digging at their own skin, and their teeth are falling out, well, that's freedom, that's liberation. That's perfectly fine, because they're not harming another human. They're just harming themselves. No big deal. I've had a lot of conversations with those types of liberals, and it's really strange how they don't really give the young, beautiful women advice. And a lot of feminists, they do cope with intoxicants. And women in general are drinking more now. I saw a study where they're drinking more now than men. Go ahead and look that up. I saw that recently. But that's not good. That's not good. We should be pushing people to be sober. But if you keep using drugs and you're a feminist, you're gonna end up in an old folks home. And the tolerance level that the nurses will have for you will be quite low. You'll become a difficult patient. They'll beat you and abuse you. You don't want to be defecating in your own diapers, right? You don't want that life for yourself, because it'll be a slow death, a painful one. So keep yourself healthy by not using drugs, and by trying to be a good mother and a good grandmother and being a good wife and going the traditional route, which is more honorable and more safe. But being an isolated, aka childless, familyless drug addict who will be in an old folks home is not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty. You should think about that. Let me know what you think. I've spoken on some of these topics before. Check out the playlists, because I have a lot of past videos on these topics on my playlist, especially the vlog playlist, and that can add to the conversation. It's a very serious topic that we should be discussing. So let me know what you think. If you'd like to join my blog and support the channel, it's www.subscribestar.com/Milahan. Hope to see you there.